Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the DIALOG presents the Walrus Talks Wellbeing. I am Andrea Boyd, the Director of Partnerships and Sponsorships at the Walrus.
Et moi, je m'appelle Renée Montpellier, directrice des opérations et des ressources humaines. Nous sommes heureux d'être dans la belle ville de Québec au congrès annuel de la FCM. Être dans un endroit riche en histoire avec un groupe de dirigeants avant-gardistes comme vous, ça nous excite.
The Walrus started 16 years ago as an optimistic project to foster conversation across Canada. We recognize that these conversations are complex and necessary, so they take many forms at the Walrus. We create conversations through fact-based and fact-checked journalism in the Walrus magazine, which you would have received in your delegate bags earlier in the days past, and daily at thewalrus.ca, and in rooms like this at the Walrus Talks Wellbeing.
Peu importe où se trouve le Walrus ou comment est consommé, nous nous engageons à être indépendants et de réunir des gens, de personnes qui sont intéressées par les questions importantes. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui et d'appuyer cet engagement avec nous.
There is no way we can do what we do without our partners, and so we are pleased to be here at FCM with DIALOG, a design firm that focuses on the intersection of architecture, planning, and urban design. Around the world, there has been growing interest among governments, designers, and project stakeholders in the design decisions that foster health, vitality, and well-being. So, DIALOG partnered with the Conference Board of Canada to develop the Community Wellbeing Framework, a guide for evaluating project design decisions to enhance community well-being. You'll be hearing more about this framework later. Okay, so this is how the Walrus Talks works. Each of our talkers has 7 minutes to present their perspectives on the topic, and they know this. Each will come up and introduce themselves. If you'd like to know more about them, their bios are on the programs that were on your chairs. You can also follow and share this afternoon's conversation with us on Twitter. And also welcome to all of you joining us on Facebook Live this afternoon.
Vous entendrez 6 orateurs pendant 7 minutes de suite. À la fin, nous savons que vous aurez de nouvelles idées à réfléchir. Nous espérons que cela suscitera de nombreuses nouvelles conversations après l'événement et de retour dans votre travail quotidien.
So, just before I let our talkers get underway, I'd like to thank each of them in advance. Thank you to founding partner of DIALOG, Antonio Gomez Palacio, policy researcher, consultant, and media commentator, Brittany Andrew Amofa, founder and executive director of Park People, Dave Harvey, research and evaluation manager for Apathy is Boring, Samantha Roosh, vice president of government relations for Shaw Communications, Chima Nekindram, and Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation, Ken Coates. Thank you all for being here. Let us begin.
On commence.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with a couple of very horrible slides. If everybody in this audience was to die 100 years ago, see what I mean by some horrible slides? That was, if you were to die, in all likelihood, you would have died of an infectious disease. So a bug you picked up somewhere, tuberculosis or something like that. Today, if you were to die, I'm keeping on with a horrible theme. If you were to die, in all likelihood, it would have been from something that is related to your health and your lifestyles. What you eat, if you exercise or not, where do you live? The world is changing. In fact, premature deaths, 60% of them have to do with the environment, with your behaviors, with all the types of things where only 40% is your genetics and healthcare. Think about that. And in fact, 96% of our collective resources, so every one of our tax dollars, 96% go to the back end of the healthcare system, at the end of this pattern and continuum of care. We're only spending 4% on that 60% that matters most. My hope is that little smoker down there in the corner. Part of the reason is because with smoking, we have actually been able to link a behavior to policy, to resources, to reorienting the ways in which we do things. And think about it. The next one on that front is certainly sedentary behaviors. I'm sure many of you are trying to build bike lanes, are trying to get kids to exercise more, are trying to do all the kinds of things that are getting people to have active lifestyles. But really, and frankly, we're only scratching the surface on health and well-being. Think of mental health. Think of social well-being. Think of all the social networks that really enhance every one of your health and well-being. So as an organization, and Jim and Marion and Ty and Jill, there's a number of us out there, this is what we decided we wanted to be. We wanted to orient everything we do around the concept of enhancing health and well-being. However, we realized that we were too small to really understand the full scope of what that meant. So that's where we teamed up with the Conference Board of Canada and CERES, the Centre for Research on Disabilities, which is based here in Quebec, and a number of different organizations to conduct some serious research. It was several years, 3,000 pieces of literature, and in fact, I know that we talked to many of you here because we talked to elected officials and municipal officials and city staff, but also developers and communities to really try and understand how we could link the way in which we plan our cities and build our environments to really deliver a broad concept of health and well-being. And we discovered there was a huge gap. If you're a chief medical officer, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of knowledge. But if you're a counselor, if you're a community member, if you're an architect, if you're a park builder, there's a huge gap in understanding what we can do. There's also a huge gap in terms of scales. If you're looking at the whole country or the province, there's a lot of statistics. There's very little at the scale of a building, of a site. So we started by developing a definition, and I'll point at it by highlighting the word political in there, which means that the voices around the table matter. Who participates in that process matters. And so we had a definition, we had a series of domains. The next step was really to understand the indicators and the metrics that would allow us to bring some evidence and bring some knowledge into this conversation. And really it is a conversation. It's a conversation around the social domain. What makes a welcoming environment? How are we creating support systems? How we create great spaces for socialization? How do we create environments that bring delight and enjoyment? How do we enhance the natural systems? How do we focus on mobility and the resilience of communities? How do we create an environment that is really focused on affordability and all the affordability of the lifestyles, but creating complete communities and thinking about the full life cycle and enhancing the local economy? How do we really bring a cultural dimension into our cities and our towns and our communities that create access to the culture that each one of us thrives upon, building a strong sense of belonging and introducing again play and learning into our environments? And ultimately, how do we bring a political, a conversational approach to this decision-making process? Having an integrated process where all the voices participate, where it's collaborative, where we're truly building a sense of ownership and stewardship. So many of you, and I know there's folks from different municipalities who have started to work on this. This is the city of Ottawa, where you see the local councillor presenting health and well-being. In Vancouver, in the city of Niagara, and I love this one. In Toronto, they decided to print a massive version and have a conversation to this effect. In the town of Maple Ridge, in BC, in Kingston, there's been an incredible amount of conversations that have really started to change the topic. And if you think about it, the province can build hospitals to the nth degree. Municipalities, communities can keep people out of hospitals. Yours is the opportunity to work health and well-being upstream. And this is an incredible piece of research that is Canada-based and is now being exported to other countries. And frankly, every one of you has the opportunity, and because I know that many of you have already shown incredible leadership and understanding and bringing a decision into the decision-making process and into the conversations that are happening in communities, in the design of parks, in the design of streets, in the construction of community centers, a real focus on what can meaningfully improve the well-being of those communities. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. How are we feeling? Can I get some feedback from the audience? Wonderful. I'm so glad that you all stayed until the end to hear what some of my other colleagues on the panel and myself have to say today. So my name is Brittany Andrea-Mofa. I am a policy researcher, a consultant, and a media commentator. You may have seen me on CBC News, TVO's The Agenda, or on a number of different media platforms. But today, I'll be sharing with you why it is absolutely essential to build community participation into the formal structure of municipal governance. I will also be showcasing how local governance and stories are interconnected when building vibrant cities for the future. So I'll begin. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the idea and concept of stories. Stories have the power to take us into distant lands, to shape and renew our understanding of the world, and provides us with a greater appreciation for who we are and each other. For my people, our stories have carried us through the Middle Passage into the Americas and the Caribbean. They would then become sources of memories, culture, and tradition. Our stories have formed the foundation that emancipated countries would build new societies on. Commemorative days would be derived from, and activism and advocacy birthed out of. My story, one of a first-generation Canadian, has informed my unique perspective and approach to some of our contemporary problems. You see, I was raised by a single mother in a social housing complex located in the East End of Toronto. Our housing development was tucked away in an enclosed neighborhood, like many other social housing complexes were built, separated and sectioned off from the rest of those around us. I often refer to my hood as a world within a city. Within it, I've witnessed gun violence, experienced uninhabitable living conditions, and grew up seeing friends whose parents struggled to keep the lights on. I grew up seeing and being surrounded by the deteriorating conditions of Toronto community housing. I saw the impact of stagnant working-class wages and low social assistance rates. And at an all too early age, I became familiar with how our daily cost of living was increasingly growing too fast to keep up with. A 2015 United Way report dubbed the City of Toronto the most unequal capital in Canada. It noted that the gap between the rich and poor households are widening at double the national pace. A tour through the city's former boroughs paints this bleak picture. Neighborhoods are currently gentrifying faster than we can track their changes. Condo and luxury apartments have become the preferred choice of developers and city council. The city's shelter system is currently at capacity and has been for at least the past decade. and the use of food banks have increased by 14% in the last 10 years. For Black and Indigenous peoples in the city, the situation is even more grim. According to the Human Rights Commission, Black people are 20 times more likely to encounter a fatal encounter with Toronto police than their white counterparts. As noted by renowned scholar David Holchansky, Black people mainly live in clusters outside of the core, where transit is poor and commutes are extremely long. Low vacancy rates, coupled with a decreasing stock of affordable housing, have resulted in reports of racialized and Indigenous people experiencing grave difficulty when trying to find housing and encountering discrimination by landlords. But how did Toronto get here? It can be reasonably argued that provincial downloads, underinvestment in housing by federal governments, stalled transit planning, and low municipal taxes are just few of the governmental actions to be blamed. But I'd like to push past the notion of poor public policy for a moment, to take a closer look at how we are making these decisions. What if it's our governance model that is exacerbating the inequality crisis we see in Toronto today? What if it is the current governance structure of most municipalities that is stifling their ability to effectively respond to issues of resource allocation, planning, and racism? I have a theory that if more stories like mine were told, from people in neighborhoods across Toronto that experienced marginalization, poverty, and exclusion, if these stories were known to municipal leaders, and most importantly, weaved into our governance model, there's a possibility the city I loved could have been given a chance to course correct. But too often, resident stories are shared through formal and impersonal processes we know as consultations and deputations. The physical and social segregation I experienced, and many others, by virtue of where we lived, was further perpetuated by these curated, limited, and unbalanced models of participation. But, as you and I know, creating additional avenues for local residents to participate in their governance process is not a new phenomenon. We've all heard of participatory budgeting, community councils, and neighborhood associations. But the way they've been pitched have framed these reforms as consolation prizes rather than as necessities. In the 2018 Toronto municipal election, the idea of strengthening Toronto community councils was introduced by mayoral candidates only after Doug Ford's decision to cut council in half began to feel permanent. But democratizing local governance is not simply a kind gesture for residents to feel included in their decision-making process. It should be viewed as a necessary way for municipal governments to maintain their relevancy in a rapidly urbanizing country, given their weak constitutional status. The strength of municipalities is that they're supposed to be the government closest to the people. But as cities grow larger and more diverse, local governance or governments will likely struggle to stay connected. 80% of Canadians now live in cities. Rapidly growing cities like Calgary, Winnipeg, Regina are poised to explore the idea of decentralizing or democratization to prevent the threat of inequality that larger cities often face. You see, the thing about stories is that you have to expose yourselves to those who have important ones to tell. But the further away municipal leaders are from the daily lives of ordinary people, the less likely they are to hear them, causing the value of local governments to decrease. A lower-tier system of governance should be comprised of residents in communities who are racialized, newcomers, women, members of the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, and those experiencing the brunt of poverty. These people need to be integrated into our policy-making process. This will allow for the building of local power and public pressure from the ground up that is also necessary when negotiating with upper levels of governments. Democratizing local governance is the policy solution municipalities should be considering for the future. You never know. You just might be one story away from solving a problem you didn't even know existed. So my call to action for you all today: go forth, find the right people, and go hear their stories. Thank you.
Hi there. My name's David Harvey. I'm Executive Director of Park People. I'm going to use some slides because parks are beautiful, parks bring beauty in our communities, and let's bring some beauty into the hall. Nous sommes un organisme national et bilingue avec un bureau à Montréal. Désolé, mais je ne parle pas très bien le français, donc je vais donner mon discours en anglais. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of Park People and then leave you with one key takeaway idea for your municipal park systems. Park People is a charity that helps people activate the power of parks in order to improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. The power of parks is their multiple benefits to support a stronger economy, resilient environments, improved mental and physical health, and stronger social connections. In our offices in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, we support city parks departments, community groups with a range of products and services. And the core part of that work is supporting the work of 850 community park groups in 46 cities across Canada who are part of the Park People National Network. An exciting tool for everyone in this room will be our new Canadian Parks Report. The report will annually highlight the trends, challenges, and leading practices in Canadian cities to inspire action, information sharing, and tracking progress in our city parks. And we've got 23 cities participating this first year. We're going to be releasing this first report in 2 weeks, and some of the key findings are going to be: one, park budgets are not keeping up with increased park use and demands. This is especially true for operating budgets which have been flatlined for many years in cities across Canada. Second, new investments will be needed to build resilience in our parks. It's been another year of flooding in much of Canada. We need to invest more in using parks to mitigate flooding as well as heat island effects during heat periods. Three, the lowest hanging fruit for improving park systems is in connecting existing parks. This includes ideas such as using infrastructure corridors for linear parks and using green streets. And fourth, cities are increasingly open to new and constructive partnerships, such as park conservancies that we're seeing in Toronto and Winnipeg. And lastly, there's a need to do more to ensure our park systems are truly welcoming to all, especially as a tool to build reconciliation with Indigenous communities. So, on to the one key critical point that I want to take with you away from my talk. It's that the cheapest, easiest, and best way to unleash this power of parks in our communities is by connecting parks to people. Why is that? It starts with so many of us who are now living in increasingly dense, crowded cities. We're increasingly living closer together, but society is drifting apart and isolated. The largest segment of the Canadian population now lives alone. We're seeing cracks in our society with social challenges and declining social capital. On nature, we're disconnecting from nature more and more. We're giving our prisoners more time outside than we're giving our kids. Yes, we need well-designed and maintained parks, but it's the people park of parks that is absolutely critical. Check out these numbers. It's programming in parks that brings people into parks and gets them active. We see an almost 50% increase in park use with programming. Sure, senior walking trails are great, but if you bring in a seniors walking club, that's what's going to get people out into the park. And parks can play a critical role in bringing people together, meeting their neighbors, building social capital. I believe that parks are more important than community centers in actually bringing people together. And building these connections is by far the #1 reason people participate in Park People's programs and volunteer in their local park. They come for a park cleanup, tree planting, or arts festival, but it's finding a sense of belonging that motivates them most. And half the groups that we support are in underserviced neighborhoods, where activating parks can play a key role in building community trust and belonging. And we need to use every single community asset to address those needs of those challenged neighborhoods and parks that have traditionally been ignored as a real tool to help those communities. And Park People's here to help you find those strategies and connect more of the people in your communities with your parks. We have grant programs for community groups and partners to support park animation and activation, festivals, picnics, movie nights, trees planting. We offer a range of community members for support with your park staffs as well, for webinars, training, online resources. Park professionals and community groups from more than 35 cities are coming to Montreal in 2 weeks for our next Canadian National City Parks Conference. We can bring park programming to your cities with such events as the Walk in the Park program or Sparking Change, which bring important services to underserviced neighborhoods. And you can check out the leading research on new park and park programming ideas. And lastly, we can be hired by your city to do services such as public life studies and innovative new ways to think about engaging the community and existing and proposed new parks. We can also devise a strategy for you to support and nurture a local park network in your community. So that's my key point, that you need to invest in great parks, but your quickest, easiest, most cost-effective, biggest return investment is connecting people to your parks. Let us know how we can help. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour, hi. My name is Samantha Roosh, and I'm the Research and Evaluations Manager at Apathy is Boring. Millennials and Gen Z, together, we're the largest and most diverse generation in Canadian history. And if you've read any of the many think pieces written about us, you've probably heard the news. We're ruining everything. Cable television, plastic straws, video stores, and yes, even democracy. The next Canadian federal election is just a few months away, and internationally, the prevailing dialogue around democracy seems to be fixated on signals of declining health. Periods that had previously been characterized by an increase in citizen apathy and political cynicism are giving way to trends that some fear are beginning to undermine the system as a whole. Stemming from and encouraged by declining voter turnout and civic engagement, we see these trends reaching a critical level among, and you've probably already guessed, millennials. We're simply opting out. In a system where we are the ones to give our elected representatives their legitimacy, imagine what democracy looks like in 10, 20, or 30 years when young people are expected to make up the majority of the voter base and are required to take over as our civic and community leaders. I'm here, however, to tell you that, like most things, the seeds of the solution are contained somewhere in the problem. I'm a millennial. I grew up watching the transition from encyclopedias to Wikipedia, from chain letters to viral memes. I'm old enough to have had my own cable subscription before swapping it out for Netflix, but I'm young enough to have never had to balance my own checkbook. I've been told a lot of stories about myself, but mostly what I've heard and understood is that I don't belong in spaces like this. They're not mine. I'm a guest, the exception, but not the rule. But there are many of us who believe it doesn't have to be that way. Current research in the field of youth cognitive development at the University of Waterloo reveals the potential for an alternate narrative. Young people between the ages of 15 and 25 are actually hardwired for innovation. They're naturally curious and more inclined to take risks than their older counterparts. Given the right combination of tools, resources, and support, young people are not only capable of developing creative solutions to long-standing problems, but are more inclined to act on those ideas given the opportunity. Believe it or not, a certain disregard for the way things have always been done can truly be a catalyst for large-scale cultural shifts, propel new ways forward, and force ultimately the broad adoption of those principles into new norms, practices, and laws. Narratives and ideas that change forever the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Canadians do little to tap into this potential at a decision-making level, however, particularly when it comes to our democracy. Factors like lack of connections or the required experience, as well as the diverse lived realities of our young people, create a variety of barriers to institutional and civic spaces. In our highest ideals, the cornerstone of our democracy has to be the sharing and distribution of power. Democracy needs to be dynamic, not fixed. As Canadians, we must recognize that our democracy, like all Western democracies, was founded to deliberately and systematically exclude and erase certain voices. If you ask most of the youth that we talk to what democracy looks like, there are few of them that would answer that it looks like them. Sadly, you don't have to look very far to understand that that's a feature of this system, not a bug. In fact, ask them directly why they don't participate. The answer is often as simple as the fact that they have never been invited to. So what would happen if we did? At Apathy is Boring, our mission is to educate and support our peers to be active and contributing citizens. We bring together groups of youth 18 to 30 across the country through our RISE program and invite them to design solutions to the problems that they see in their community. We invite them to share their perspectives, their ideas, their expertise, and ask them to engage their friends and their communities in that process. The result? We're shifting the narrative on what youth engagement can look like for the young people that we work with. And it's contagious. Young people engaging each other in the practice of democracy. There are more of us than you think, and we're just getting started. Programs like RISE provide an instructional look at how our public spaces could function. We need to be asking how those with access can create spaces in which they use their power to make room for different voices, different perspectives, and new conversations. In our work, we often ask ourselves, who's not in the room? The power in continuously asking that question is that we are able to intentionally build better rooms. Rooms that reflect better the society we live in and the multitude of voices within it. Opportunities like RISE are uncommon and don't reach the vast majority of young people in our country, particularly those who live in our most remote and marginalized communities. We too rarely make spaces where youth are meaningfully engaged as thought leaders or feel empowered to bring their perspectives and lived experiences to the forefront. Even rarer still are those meaningful experiences in which we can have a real impact on the issues that concern us. As civic leaders, it's up to you to change this, to recognize and affirm that young people are not simply emerging citizens, but actual citizens who are at a valuable and transitional stage of life where their capacity for innovation can contribute to new, previously unimagined solutions to our collective problems. Engaging young people in the process of innovation, especially when supported by those with the experience and power to bring those ideas to life, benefits everyone equally. It safeguards the future of our democracy as well as our industries, our neighborhoods, our institutions, and it makes us all better. Moving forward, we need to be asking ourselves, how can we reimagine democracy together as an open and ongoing dialogue? One that is inclusive and seeks out new voices with diverse lived experiences, innovative ideas, and at all stages of life. One that enables young people not just to see themselves reflected in the process, but meaningfully engaged by it. Our democracy only works if we all work for it. So, I want to ask you today, who's not in the room? And what are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Good afternoon. There's been a lot of fuss about smart cities. In my last job, I was chief of staff for Mayor Nenshi at the City of Calgary, and I came to my first FCM 8 years ago. And 8 years ago, I was really excited. You come here and you meet all these municipal leaders from across the country. You go to the trade show and get all that awesome swag. Thank you, CN, for that battery charger. I still have it. And at every year, for the last 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, there's been talk about smart cities. And it's been going on for quite a bit. And I think a lot of us are starting to look like this guy. You've been talking about it for so long, but nothing's happened. And I think that's because a lot of us have not given, a lot of us are super excited about it, but we haven't actually explained why it's such a big deal. So, we've been talking about smart cities like it's going to be the next best thing since sliced bread. And for many of you, it's probably not really clear why. Now, there's been a lot of great information at this year's FCM. Our colleagues at Bell did a really great presentation yesterday about smart cities. We did one about 5G. Though 5G and smart cities are interrelated. And I want to give you a little bit of context today about smart cities and why it's really going to be up to you as elected representatives to determine how this technology is going to be employed and how it could help make your communities better. So some context. When I try to explain the impacts of smart cities, I like to look at another example. And that example I'm going to use is the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, it was a big deal. It changed the way the smartphones worked. But arguably, a year later after the introduction of the iPhone, Apple introduced the App Store. And the App Store, I would argue, has had a far bigger impact on technology. Because when they launched the App Store, there was about 500 apps when they launched it. There are now 2.1 million, and since 2017, the App Store has generated over $50 billion for application developers, from companies from the size of Microsoft to your 10-year-old niece who created an app and put it on the App Store and is now, paying for your kitchen renovation. That's an industry that did not exist in 2007. Completely brand new, because a whole new platform was developed. Well, 5G is going to do the same thing. 5G is really about the new networks that are going to be built by telecommunications companies in the upcoming years. And those new networks will allow for the transmission of data at much higher speeds and a greater volume of data. It'll facilitate machines talking to machines. It'll create this thing we call the Internet of Things. It's going to create an entire new platform. But what it's also going to do is cause that 13-year-old girl to create new applications that are going to use these high-speed networks. It's a new platform. How big is it going to be? We're not sure, but our friends at the McKinsey Global Institute have estimated that it could, by 2025, range from $4 trillion to $11 trillion US, a completely brand new industry. It's absolutely going to be huge. So, and this industry is going to do something interesting. It's going to create a whole bunch of data. As you have sensors and machines are recording data, you're going to create this massive pool of information that your municipalities can use in order to run your operations better or to make better decision making. But it's really going to be up to local government to figure out how this is going to happen and how it's going to work. And local government has two big roles in the development of smart cities. First of all, it is local government and industry which will have to figure out how to deploy these telecommunication networks. And if we as an industry and local government have to figure out how to partner to make sure that these networks are deployed in a way that is efficient, but also benefit the community and sensitive to the community. And second, it's local government that's going to determine what kind of applications are going to have be beneficial for the community. So maybe it's a good idea to put sensors in all the garbage cans and talk to the garbage truck and let them know if they should be picked up. But maybe that's just a giant waste of money and it won't actually make anything more efficient. We're not sure. And those are the things that you're going to have to figure out as a community. You know, how are cities and municipalities going to decide? I think there's about 4 criteria that you will be looking at. Is it going to save you any money? Is it going to help make your communities more sustainable and meet your climate change goals? Is it going to make your community more livable, healthier? Finally, is it going to help your council and your city administrations make better decisions, be more organized, be more efficient? And this can all happen, but it's going to have to happen through partnerships. We can't use the same old approach of customer-vendor. We as an industry, we as developers, and we as local government have to come together to figure out how do we make these new networks and how do we make these new applications work in a way so they actually make a better quality of life for all our citizens. It's going to be an exciting future. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Ken Coates. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation at the University of Saskatchewan. My research focuses on how we can use modern technologies to help small towns and rural areas adapt to the realities of the 21st century. When I introduce myself, I say the most important thing is that I'm from Whitehorse, Yukon. Raised there, it's my home community. But I'm also equally proud of the fact that I've lived in 14 other cities across the country, from Banff to Prince George, from Victoria to Brandon, Manitoba, from St. John to Saskatoon and Waterloo. I admire the passion. You are the most important level of government in Canada. The other governments don't understand that. And when I look at other places around the world, I spend a lot of time in Japan, and I see places that do understand the importance of local government. I have a real sense of appreciation for what you do and what you contribute. My favorite word, we all have our favorite words, and mine is topophilia. I'm assuming most of you have no idea why I have a word like that, but topophilia means love of place. It means love of place. It captures something that's actually really hard to describe. Why do I say Whitehorse is so important to me? Partly is because I was raised there. I'm nostalgic about the fact that when I weighed 120 pounds. I'm excited about what it meant to me, my friends and my colleagues, and the way I grew up in those areas. But we have a special bond to a specific place. We feel certain ways about 1 or 2 places in the world that just make us feel as though we actually belong. It's geography, it's family, it's culture, it's history, it's actually who we are. We face a time when that sense of place is very much under attack, where our connection to place is being uprooted, partly because we're so mobile, partly because there's so much change going on. But the reality is that every one of us wants to be part of something great. We want to be something great in our families, but greater beyond in our communities. We live in a modern world, we just saw some descriptions here, where it's anonymous, it's divided, people are separated, they're hiding behind their computer screens, they're spending too much time on your smartphones, though I notice you are not doing that. I appreciate it greatly. We're in the period of great technological change. Technological change has capacity to improve our quality of life. Smart cities, great technologies, wonderful things being done, just fantastic. But technology is also something that's equally good and bad. It will cause and has caused enormous disruptions. We will see that continue to happen in the future. If you are not monitoring in your communities the impact on work, the way in which technology is changing jobs, then you're not paying attention to the future. The estimates are that between 25 and 50% of North American jobs will be replaced by new technologies. I'm personally convinced that we'll not replace anywhere near as many jobs as we'll lose. that this is a job killer in the process as we go down the line. So you have major choices, and we're really good here at telling you what to do, so I'm going to join up with my other friends and colleagues here doing the same sort of thing. But how do we understand the role of technology, and how do we make it work for our communities? So job loss and job creation. Some of you, half of you, I guarantee half of you in the room are struggling with the loss of manufacturing and other activities in your communities. I lived in Kitchener-Waterloo when we lost 12,000 jobs in 1 month at a manufacturing center and experienced that. We're seeing new jobs being created. If you're in Montreal or Vancouver, the animation sector is expanding very rapidly and producing great opportunities for everybody. We're seeing the massive dislocation of traditional media. We've lost 250 community newspapers in Canada in the last 10 years. We'll probably lose more than that in the next 10 years. And we always talk about how not to worry, we have social media. Social media does not replace the traditional news source, does not replace our communication system of local radio and local newspapers. We're seeing new technologies undermine existing businesses. And those of you that live in small towns will see your stores closing down. Hardware stores stopping operations. We've lost most of the bookstores in Canada as a consequence of new technologies. But we'll also see other parts of our communities reaching out to global markets. I was just in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island and visited 4 Indigenous communities in the area. They're very actively engaged in selling their fish products overseas. Absolutely fantastic. So the question is, can we actually control our future? Is this something that just happens? We sit back and watch it and nothing much we can do. So I'd suggest a few things. Focus on the future. Start thinking about the future in your communities on a regular basis. Are you going to accept autonomous vehicles? How about drones and the use? You have regulations for drones. What are you planning for robots and 3D printing in your communities? What's going to happen when the artificial intelligence revolution comes on and the Internet of Things actually starts dislocating jobs and opportunities? What you need to do, I think, is find a way to make the future a common ground. If you haven't been, many communities are trying this. I had a lot of time to work with the folks in Stratford, Ontario, who've made the future a place to sort of look at with enthusiasm, and really impressed with what they're doing now in Kelowna. Have open discussions about your technological plans. What are you hoping to do in the future? Where are things going? Watch what they did in Olds, Alberta, a small rural community where they basically decided everybody would have 1 gigabit speed to their homes as a way of retaining at the front edge of technology. A really, truly impressive accomplishment. And watch what they're doing the same thing in Caslo, British Columbia, a small little community way off, not quite off the grid, but getting pretty close to it as we go forward. Focus on the people at risk. You're losing jobs, particularly for young men. Moderately skilled young men are not going to have the futures that we had in our generation, particularly in manufacturing and the resource sector. Take a look at the job losses in Fort McMurray and across Alberta and share some of the dislocation. Watch what happened in Oshawa, Ontario, where the factories started to close down, and in Pembroke, Ontario, and watch what the regional colleges are doing to try to revitalize these communities. You have to monitor and discuss technological change. You must not let technology be imposed on you. Passivity is not a solution in this environment. Communities don't really understand what's happening. The changes are so rapid and so fast, they're so technological and complicated, and we wake up one day with something we didn't want. Did we want social media to undermine the global political process as profoundly as it has? Did we really want Facebook and Google to have the dominant power? These are multi-billion-dollar corporations that are exercising staggering influence over what we know, what we learn, how we shop, what we do. Did we want that? No. Did we talk about it? No. Has it happened? Absolutely. There are places that are doing this. Again, Kitchener-Waterloo has ongoing debates and discussions about what's actually going on in the field. Saskatchewan, the agricultural sector, and one of my favorite places, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is doing some really interesting work on new technologies. So validate your key communication tools. Look and see what actually works. Follow the models of Tweed and Prince Edward County, both in Ontario. Do something that you haven't probably done very much. Connect with your diaspora. We always think of community as people who are currently living there. My friends from Whitehorse know that I talk about Whitehorse all the time. I am as much a community member now. I moved away in 1974. It still defines who I am. Connect up. Follow the models of Cassiar, British Columbia. Follow what the Yukon does. Look at what's going on in small-town Manitoba, where they're connecting up with people who've left and drawing them back into a sense of planning community futures. Celebrate those who left. Make sure they feel part of your community. You are trying to create successful communities, and many of you are succeeding extremely well. But remember that technology will heighten the opportunities and also heighten the dangers. The next 20 years have the opportunity to be very positive and constructive and extremely destructive and worrisome if we just let it happen. Well-being relies on topophilia. Sustainability relies on topophilia. You must love your place. You would not be in your seats and in your offices and running for public life if you did not love your place. How do you draw everybody else into that world? Use technology to sustain your communities. Use technology to recreate your communities. Use technology to expand your communities. Make sure that you do not simply sit back and let technology define and control your future. That would be a dreadful outcome. Thanks, everyone.
Wow. Please join me in thanking all of our talkers this afternoon: Antonio Gomez Placido, Brittany Andrew Amofa, Dave Harvey, Samantha Roosh, Chima Nikindrum, and Ken Coates. As I mentioned earlier, we're so grateful to our supporters and our partners at the Walrus, and this afternoon we're pleased to present the Walrus Talks Wellbeing with DIALOG. So to tell us more, please welcome back DIALOG's founding partner, Antonio Gomez Palacio. Thank you, Antonio.
So what just happened? I've been asked to try and tell you just what happened. And this is what I perceived. So you just spent 4 days listening to an incredible amount of stories, an incredible amount of initiatives and things taking place. And I think it was actually really well captured in the tail end of the AGM when there was a call to action for everybody to really advocate for a bold vision for empowering local government. I think that was an incredible call there. So I'm going to just tell you what happened in the last little moment, but then I actually have 7 calls to action for you. I've got some homework for you. You thought you were just going to wind down softly into the tail end of the FCM. No, you're going to get some homework. So what just happened was, after spending 4 days of really trying to understand what's the best and the brightest and what is exciting coast to coast, the Walrus magazine was challenged to bring to you what should you be thinking about the future. What's next year? What should you be thinking in 2 years, in 5 years, in 20 years from today? What is the next FCM going to be really thinking about? And one of the key topics that you heard loud and clear was the concept of well-being, of really pushing and understanding the health and well-being of people. Marion tells me that she has a stack of those wheels and she wants to get rid of them and not carry them home, so lock her down and get a little bit more of that from her. But then you heard from Brittany that it's all about personal stories. It's down to yourself, to the stories that you hear, to the people that you talk to. So we need to really re-engage a critical conversation, and a critical conversation about even what democracy and governance constitutes. So go forth, she asks us, to go and find the right people and go and hear their stories. And then you heard from Dave that parks matter. They build community. They deliver a sense of place. They connect people. And it's one of the easiest, most simple things that you can possibly do to utterly transform your community. And then, of course, Samantha came up and she told us that millennials are ruining everything. And then she kind of turned it on us and suggested that they may actually be part of the solution as well, right? They are hardwired for innovation, she told us. They sit at the end and the edge of democracy, and yet they might be the salvation of democracy. So she asks us, who is not in the room, and what are we going to do about it? And then Chima and Ken try and push us to understand the impacts of technology. Chima very clearly, put the horse before the cart and suggested that we need to determine how technology will be used to make life better for people, and not the other way around. How often is the conversation actually the other way around? Then, of course, Ken taught us a new word, topophilia. I think everyone is jotting that one down, love of place. But he tells us to pay attention to the future. How often do you do that? Actually pay attention not to the past or the present, but pay attention to the future. The technology disruption is actually different in small towns and in cities and larger cities. But ultimately, he suggests that we can control the future. We can find that common ground, and that passivity is not an option. That's the perfect segue to your homework, the calls to action. So I've got 7 calls to action. The first one, go and find a park. That's an easy one. You can do that. Second one, talk to people, right? Third one, find the voice you haven't heard before. Capture their stories, right? And then practice topophilia. I'm at 5 already, right? Love that place, love the people, love those stories, because Ken told us that unless you've really practiced that topophilia, none of the other things matter. Then I would love if in the decision-making process within your municipality, with council, with everything that is taking place, from now on, you put well-being at the core of that decision-making. It becomes the one criteria that you're putting forward to evaluate everything that happens. The next transit project, the next community garden, the next thing that is showing up. If you have that one criteria, you can really start to make a difference. And the last call to action, the last piece of homework, has been sitting in front of our eyes the whole time. And that was posted by Walrus in that red banner. Go forth and host a conversation, an independent, complex, facts-based, necessary conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antonio, and thank you to all of your colleagues who are here today from DIALOG.
On vous invite à regarder des centaines d'autres vidéos de 7 minutes de Walrus Cox sur notre chaîne YouTube appelée Walrus Television, qui est disponible à thewalrus.ca. Et pendant que vous visitez notre site web, vous pouvez également souscrire au magazine.
Thank you to our community of donors and sponsors whose support allows us to provoke new thinking and spark conversations on matters that are vital to Canadians, like the one you heard here this afternoon. Fake news is cheap to make. Fact-based, fact-checked news is expensive. We're grateful to our community of more than 1,800 individuals and organizations, including Shaw Communications, who support the Walrus annually. You can learn more about supporting the Walrus at thewalrus.ca, and that's also where you can find videos from this afternoon of the Walrus Talks Wellbeing. It'll be available for you to share with your friends, family, and your communities. So thank you to our speakers, to DIALOG, and to Stephen and Caroline at FCM who invited us to be here with you this afternoon.
Merci à tous nos orateurs, à DIALOG et à la FCM.
And remember that we are not the Walrus, you are the Walrus. Thank you.
Merci.